Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pragya Bandari, and today I will be presenting our paper titled Searching for Selfie in TLS 1.3 with CPSA. I'm currently a PhD student in computer science studying at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. This research was conducted alongside Dr. Edward Ziegler, who is an expert in protocol analysis and computer security, working at the National Security Agency. He's also an adjunct faculty member at UMBC and has had a lot of experience using the tool CPSA. My advisor, Dr. Charles Nicholas, is a faculty member at UMBC, and his guidance and expertise helped us in completing this research successfully. The main aim behind this research was to check to see if the tool CPSA can find an attack named selfie attack that was found in TLS 1.3, and the conclusion was that it did. In today's presentation, I would like to give a brief overview of our significant findings and then move on to the motivation behind this research. I would also be talking about some of the previous works that have been with respect to formal verification of TLS 1.3 protocol. I will then explain working of the protocol TLS 1.3, which will be followed by an explanation of the selfie attack that we are focusing on in this research. After explaining the CPSA tool in brief, I will talk about how we modeled the protocol in this tool. I will then discuss our analysis based on the shapes that the model produced and end with the conclusion for this research. So one of the first things we wanted to investigate was if it is possible to identify selfie attack using CPSA, and the answer was that yes, it was able to. We also suggested two possible remediations for this attack. One was to include the server identity of the party initiating the communication with the pre-shared key, and the other was to use directional keys between the parties. A pre-shared key, as the name suggests, is a shared secret which was previously shared between the client and the server using some secure channel before it needs to be used. I will be using the abbreviation PSK to refer to a pre-shared key hereafter. In addition, we also demonstrated that the post-handshake authentication is not effective at preventing the impersonification attack. So TLS 1.3 was one of the first protocols to embrace formal verification as part of the design process. The IETF put significant effort in ensuring the security of the TLS 1.3 that they requested formal analysis and verification of the protocol as part of the design process. The formal verification was made using symbolic models and computational tools, among other methods. But an attack was discovered by Nick Drucker and Shay Guron in 2019. It was a type of a reflection attack, and they referred to it as the selfie attack. So the main motivation behind this research was to check to see if CPSA could find this attack that the other tools missed. You might ask, how is CPSA different from the other tools? The main difference is that CPSA enumerates all possible executions of the protocol for a given set of assumptions. Other tools require you to provide the theorems or the security proof for the property you wish to prove. But with CPSA, you only need to provide a set of assumptions, and it will enumerate all possible protocol executions, some of which may violate the security properties of the protocol. As mentioned on the previous slide, there were several formal verification efforts of TLS protocol using symbolic and computational models. We believe one of the main reasons that the previous formal verifications were unable to find the selfie attack was because of the assumptions they made. In verification using symbolic models, it was assumed that mutual authentication between a client to server or even client to client is established using a PSK in a single direction. Under those circumstances, there is no issue using the PSK. In the case where either client could initiate the communication, the issue arises as the messages from either client initiating the communication are similar enough to allow replays to confuse the client, as a client could initiate a secure communication with itself. In computational model, it was assumed that a PSK is shared between only one client and one server, defining a directional relationship for the key. Now, there is nothing wrong with this assumption except that it was not specified in the specification of the protocol. So they unknowingly fixed the attack while making their assumption, and hence this model could not identify the attack. Now let us try to understand a simple TLS 1.3 handshake and how we used it for our modeling. This message flow diagram on your screen is taken from the TLS 1.3 specification by IETF. As we can observe here, a part of the client and the server messages have an asterisk symbol next to it. The symbol here indicates that the part of the message is optional. For example, let's look at the first message in this handshake, the client hello message that is sent to the server. A client hello message is sent along with the key share and a pre-shared key. But in our model, we are assuming the minimum required assumptions, because in CPSA, we always try to model the messages with only the required assumptions and try to skip the messages that are optional. So we only consider the client hello and the pre-shared key. Similarly, on the server side, the response to the first message would be a server hello and a pre-shared key and a finished message. A finished message here is a hash of all the previous messages. For the final step in this three-way handshake, the client replies to the server with a client finished message, which is again a hash of all the previous messages. Finally, a connection is established and the data is shared. One point to note here about the establishment of the pre-shared key is that the client and the server need to agree upon a key. And that can be done in two ways. One of the method is called out of band, which means externally with the help of a trusted third party who shares the key with the client and the server. Or the other method is that the client and the server have agreed upon a PSK in one of the previous secure connection. Now let us try to understand how a selfie attack can be executed. The diagram on your screen is referred to from the Drucker and Guron's paper. As we can observe here, the perpetrator in this case, which is Eve, positions himself between Alice and Bob. Eve receives the client hello message from Alice and then sends the same message back to Alice. Alice now acts as a server and sends the appropriate server hello message back to Eve. Eve then again reflects the same message back to Alice as a response to Alice's first client hello message. Alice assumes this response is from Bob and sends the client finished message back to Eve, thinking it's Bob. And this way the mutual authentication was established between Alice and Eve, whereas in actuality, Alice was just talking to herself. And in this way, the adversary Eve has performed a selfie attack. Next, let's find out how we model this protocol using CPSA. But before that, let me give a brief description of this tool. So CPSA stands for Cryptographic Protocol Shapes Analyzer. It is developed by MITRE. The tool was written in Haskell. It follows strand space theory for producing shapes, and it follows the Logjam network intruder model for analysis. CPSA performs a symbolic analysis of the protocol. As such, it has limitations in that it does not consider cryptographic attacks and cannot find attacks related to weaknesses in the cryptography or hashing used by the protocol. These limitations did not impact this analysis in any way. In the further slides, we will come across shapes that would look similar to the one on the right of your screen. This is an example of an output shape the CPSA model produces. This example shape was taken from the CPSA manual to help understand how we can read this shape and make our analysis. First of all, the shape shows the participants in the message flow. In this case, there is an init, short for initiator, and res, short for responder. The black colored dot below the initiator represents a message that was sent, whereas a blue colored dot as shown below the responder represents a message received. A solid line between the sent message and received message represents that the message was received unaltered by the responder. A dotted line indicates that the message received was not the same as the message sent, but some components of the message sent were necessary to complete the message that was received. On moving the mouse over to the dots, we can read the messages. Now, let's get to how we modeled it in CPSA. So on the left is a code snippet of how it is written. And on the right is the TLS 1.3 three-way handshake diagram that we discussed before and our modeling. So highlighted in blue boxes are the participants of the protocol. We have a client and a server and another rule named key share. In our model, we are assuming the PSK is shared between the client and the server externally with the help of a trusted third party, which in our case is the key share. So highlighted in the green is the way in which we represent the pre-shared key. The pre-shared key is a symmetric key, so we write that as a S key. Highlighted in purple is how we declare the PSK. We're saying PSK is non-originating, which means we are telling CPSA that this key is only known to client and server. Highlighted in pink is how key share shares the PSK with the client and the server. The other lines of code are the messages written with minimum assumptions compared to the figure we have on the right. This is our initial model, so let us now look at the shapes that this model produces. As I mentioned before, CPSA enumerates all possible executions of the protocol. It considers a client's perspective and a server's perspective. So on the left, we have a completed shape from the client's perspective, and on the right, we have the server's perspective. When we look at both these shapes, we can see that there are blue and black dots all connected with solid lines. So this should mean that the protocol executed with no problems. But what we observed in our analysis is that the identities of the parties are assumed but not explicit. Does the client really know who it is talking to? The server could be the client itself, because the only requirement we have here is that the client and the server need to know the PSK for mutual authentication, and a party that could act as both client and server could initiate a secure connection with itself. Now these shapes are ambiguous about who is talking to whom, and it might be hard for you to understand this analysis. So to help better visualize and understand, we made another model where we introduced identities to track the parties communicating. We have the initial model that we just looked into, and we modified that model to show explicitly to CPSA that the key is bidirectional. We introduced identities to the key to indicate the client, the first variable, and the server, the second, as we can observe in the code snippets on the screen. Initially, the key share role had no identities associated with the key, and now we are explicitly mentioning the direction A to B and B to A so that we can track which key the client and the server use. If both parties use the same key, then they both agree on the identities of the client and server. If they each use a different key, then they are the same party communicating with themselves, but believing they are communicating with a different party. So the explicit mentioning of the bidirectional nature of the key produced 4 completed shapes. On this slide, let us look at the shapes produced from the client's perspective. As can be seen from the shapes, both parties are using the same key from the key shape, indicating that they agree with whom they are communicating. Let's look at the highlighted red boxes. We can see here that the identities on the client and the server are the same. For example, this is how we read the shape on the left. The client variable A is assigned the value B and the variable B is assigned A. On the server strand, the variables map to the same identities. This is also true for the skeleton on the right. For these shapes, there is no selfie attack. Let us look at the other 2 shapes produced. As we can observe just by looking at these shapes, they are not the expected shapes. The client and the server are using different keys, indicating that they disagree with whom they are communicating. When we look closely at the variables assigned in the shapes, we can see that the identities of client and server are not the same. Looking at figure 9, we can see that according to the client, variable A is assigned B and B is assigned A, but the server is using the key that assigns variable A to A and B to B. The same swapped keys can be observed in figure 10. Here we can observe the selfie attack explicitly shown in the shapes, as the client and server have the same identity, but they believe that they are communicating with another party. One of the remediations we are proposing is to include the server's identity. The server's identity can be included during the handshake process or post-handshake. First, we modeled including the server's identity during the handshake. When the server responds to the client hello message, it should add its identity so the client knows who it is talking to. We modeled this fix and the following shapes as shown on your screen were produced. We can observe in these shapes where both the client and server are using the same key, and in the highlighted red boxes that the client and server knows who they are talking to, and so there is no selfie attack. Next, we included the server's identity after the handshake or post handshake. So what we did in this case is that we included a certificate request from the client side. The client requests for a certificate from the server to authenticate itself, and the server needs to respond back to the client with a certificate response. The following shape as shown on the slide was produced. We can observe that something does not seem right. We can see that there are 2 sessions of the client created. One of the client sessions completed the protocol in the expected way, but we could observe a selfie attack on the other client session. So we wanted to see what shape would be produced if we explicitly introduced another client as a participant in the model. The shape that model produced clearly shows the selfie attack. We can see that the keys used between the client and server are not the same. So it is talking to itself. So in conclusion, adding the server's identity post handshake does not work, and so it should be added during the handshake. The other proposed remediation is to use a unique PSK per client server pair. So the shapes produced from this model show no traces of a selfie attack, so we've concluded that this fix works. In conclusion, our work has illustrated the strengths and weaknesses of formal method tools. Although TLS 1.3 has been formally analyzed using Tamarin, Maude NPA and ProVerif tools, initially researchers missed the selfie attack, perhaps because they did not look for such an attack, or the researchers were focused on critical known attacks such as Logjam, triple handshake, or SMAC. Or they could be, in fact, that the attack was not observed in TLS 1.2, so it wasn't highlighted. In contrast, CPSA enumerates all equivalence classes of protocol executions for a given set of assumptions, so it was able to identify the attack, but it requires the user to interpret the graphical output. We were also able to successfully show that the proposed mitigations did not show selfie attack in the shapes, and it works. With this, we come to an end of our presentation. Thank you so much for your time. We are now open to any questions, comments, and suggestions. Thank you.